There is a silence in your brain that only God can touch. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of presence, a sacred stillness that begins when the chaos quiets, when your mind stops searching and when your heart finally surrenders. You've probably felt it before in prayer, in meditation, in awe. It's that moment when everything slows down and something greater steps in, something divine. But what if that moment wasn't just emotional or symbolic? What if it was biological? What if your brain itself was designed to receive God? For centuries, mystics and saints have described these encounters. Rumi called it intoxication. Saint Teresa of Avila called it union. Sufis called it annihilation. Buddhists called it emptiness. But the experience was always the same, an overwhelming sense of connection, love and clarity beyond words. Now science is catching up. In the last 2 decades, groundbreaking studies in neuroscience, especially the work of Dr. Andrew Newberg, have shown us what happens inside the brain during deep spiritual states. We can now see what changes, what shuts off, what lights up, and most importantly, we can begin to understand why these states feel more real than reality itself. So what actually happens in your brain when you pray, when you meditate, when you feel touched by something beyond yourself? This video is not just an explanation, it's an invitation to see your inner world through the lens of science and soul, to discover that your longing for God, for the universe, for consciousness, is not just poetic, it's wired into you. And maybe, just maybe, the door you've been trying to open is already built into your brain. The universal search for connection. Every culture, every century, every human heart has carried a question: how do I touch God? Not just in churches, temples, or mosques, but in moments of silence, grief, awe, and longing. The question echoes not only through sacred texts, but through your very bones when life gets too loud, when suffering cuts too deep, or when something beautiful brings you to tears and you whisper without thinking, "Thank you," to something, to someone, even if you don't know who. This is not about religion. It's about an ache so old it's older than language, the ache to belong, to feel that you are not alone in this vast, spinning mystery. And every culture that ever lived tried to answer it. The Sufis danced, the shamans sang, the monks sat in silence, the Hebrew prophets cried out in the desert, the yogis turned inward, the mystics wrote poetry about it, and the scientists, even now, scan the brain to find the traces it leaves behind. You don't have to be spiritual to know this feeling. You've tasted it when you looked at the ocean and felt your soul stretch. You've brushed it when you held someone's hand as they left this world. You've glimpsed it in moments of surrender, when your mind stopped and all that remained was presence, stillness, a knowing deeper than thought. What's astonishing is that across thousands of years and miles, from Rumi in Persia to Lao Tzu in China, from the Vedas in India to the Desert Fathers of Christianity, the descriptions are strikingly similar. All speak of dissolving separation. All speak of merging with the source. All speak of an intelligence behind the universe that is not far, but within. They didn't agree on names, but they agreed on the experience, the feeling of oneness, of divine presence, of God. Not as a figure in the sky, but as the very breath in your lungs, the stillness inside your mind, the pulse in your chest. Modern neuroscience is now catching up with what these sages always pointed to. Andrew Newberg, one of the leading researchers in neurotheology, discovered that when people pray or meditate deeply, specific regions of the brain activate and others quiet down. The parietal lobes, which create the sense of a boundary between self and world, go silent. The frontal lobes, responsible for planning and control, slow their pace. The limbic system, our emotional core, begins to glow with a sense of love, awe, and peace. These are not fantasies. They are measurable shifts. They are your biology mirroring your spirituality. And they happen when you surrender to something greater, when you reach for Deus. But here's what matters most. These moments are available to you, not only in temples, not only to monks or mystics. They are available in your room at night when the noise fades, in your breath as you sit in prayer, in the softness of your voice when you say, I don't know, but I trust. They are in the silence behind your thoughts, the peace that comes when you stop trying to control everything, the warmth that rises when you open your heart, not just to God, but to life. Even the act of asking this question, how do I connect, is already part of the connection, because something in you remembers. Something in you already knows that there is more to this life than what can be measured, that your mind is not a machine, that your soul is not alone, that the same intelligence that moves galaxies also moves through your heartbeat, through your longing, through your desire to heal. So maybe connection doesn't begin in books or rituals or beliefs. Maybe it begins with honesty, with pausing long enough to notice that underneath the noise of modern life, there is a quiet place, a still space, where God waits without rushing, where your brain, your biology, your very cells open like a flower toward the light. Maybe prayer isn't a request, it's a remembering. Maybe meditation isn't an escape, it's a return. And maybe the connection you seek was never missing, only muffled, covered by the rush of tasks, screens, stress, expectations. But now, here, you are listening again. You are becoming still. You are touching that ancient thread that connects you not only to the source, but to everyone who ever searched for it. The mystics, the scientists, the broken, the healed, and you. Now. Because the search for God is the most human thing about you. And the moment you start searching, you've already started to find. The spiritual brain, mapping the experience. When you enter a deep spiritual state, when you pray with your whole being or dissolve into silent meditation, your brain doesn't go blank. It lights up and it quiets down, all at once. This is what Dr. Andrew Newberg began to discover when he placed seasoned meditators, Franciscan nuns, Buddhist monks, Pentecostal worshippers, and everyday spiritual seekers into brain scanners. He wasn't trying to disprove God. He was trying to understand what happens when the human mind connects to something greater, to Deus, to the universe, to whatever name your heart dares to speak in reverence. The results were nothing short of revolutionary. Time after time, regardless of tradition, when people entered what they described as deep spiritual states, unity with God, divine presence, unconditional love, or infinite light, the scans told a fascinating story. The parietal lobes, especially the posterior superior region, dimmed. This is the part of your brain that defines the boundary between self and other, between me and the world. When this region goes quiet, something strange and beautiful happens. You no longer feel like a separate observer. You become the ocean, the sky, the prayer. The illusion of separation dissolves. This matches precisely what mystics have described for centuries, that in the highest states of connection, the self falls away, and all that remains is presence. Not an empty presence, but one alive with God. Meanwhile, the limbic system, your brain's emotional heart, begins to glow. This is where you process feelings like love, joy, awe, and reverence. When people feel the presence of Deus, it's not just a thought, it's a full-body emotional state. The warmth in your chest, the tears that come for no reason, the overwhelming sensation that you are loved, known, held. Science sees this too, as intensity in the amygdala and hippocampus, as a surge of emotional coherence that marks these moments as unforgettable. Then there's the thalamus, acting like a conductor of consciousness. In these states, it becomes unusually synchronized. This may explain the reports of sudden clarity, insight, or what some describe as divine downloads, when the truth of your existence feels obvious, radiant, and beyond words. You don't think the truth, you become it. That's how clarity works when you're no longer fighting your ego for control. And speaking of ego, the frontal lobes, especially the prefrontal cortex, tend to decrease activity. These are the parts responsible for planning, analyzing, and exerting control. When people surrender in prayer or let go in deep meditation, these areas soften. The grip of "I must figure it out" begins to fade. This is the neurological mirror of surrender. What mystics called abandonment into the hands of God, neuroscientists now see as frontal deactivation, the mind relaxing its grip and allowing a greater intelligence to move through. This convergence of ancient experience and modern science is not coincidence. It's a bridge. And you walk across it every time you stop trying to achieve a spiritual state and instead allow yourself to receive it. Your brain is not in the way. It is the way. It's not a barrier to God. It's the very architecture through which your soul remembers its source. These findings are universal. Buddhists describe losing the self. Christians describe being filled with the spirit. Yogis describe samadhi, the dissolving of mind. Scientists describe parietal suppression. But the essence is the same. You are wired for connection. And when you enter that quiet, timeless place, your brain doesn't fabricate God. It reflects what your soul already knows. And in those moments, you don't need proof. You need presence. Because when your parietal lobes fall silent and your emotional brain ignites and your planning mind lets go, you are not analyzing life. You are becoming life, becoming prayer, becoming the whisper of Deus inside your own breath. Small doors into the divine. Not every spiritual experience arrives like a thunderclap or a beam of light breaking through the clouds. Sometimes it arrives in the quietest ways. A pause in the noise, a breath that feels like eternity, a song that cracks something open inside you. Sometimes it's not a miracle that changes you, it's the silence between thoughts. We tend to think that to connect with God, to truly touch the divine, we need some mystical awakening, some mountaintop moment, some cosmic vision. But neuroscience and lived experience tell another story. The path to Deus often begins through smaller doors, more ordinary openings. Not every transformation is fireworks, some are slow dawns, and sometimes those are the most lasting of all. When Andrew Newberg scanned the brains of spiritual practitioners, he didn't just look at monks or saints. He studied people like you, ordinary people who reported feeling a sense of sacred presence during a walk in the woods, during prayer at their kitchen table, during a song that made them cry. What he found was astonishing. Even these subtle moments, even the small connections with something greater, registered in the brain as meaningful, real, healing. You don't need to wait for enlightenment to start changing. You don't need to experience nirvana to access healing. The moment you pause to breathe with intention, the moment you sit in stillness and whisper your longing to Deus, the moment you notice beauty and feel something shift inside, your brain begins to reorganize. The neurochemistry of peace, of focus, of healing begins to flow. The thalamus aligns, the parietal lobe quiets, the limbic system engages. These are not fantasies. These are real portals, measurable, repeatable, accessible. That is why small practices matter so deeply. A 2-minute prayer whispered in the dark. A moment of stillness before opening your phone. A single conscious breath while touching your chest and remembering that you're alive. These small acts are not trivial, they're gateways. They're rehearsal spaces for transformation. Every time you enter one, you teach your brain a new pattern. You remind your body what presence feels like. You stretch your nervous system toward calm, clarity, coherence. And if you've never had a big spiritual experience, if you've never seen the light or felt the sky open up, you are not broken. You are not excluded. You are not behind. The truth is, your connection is always available, always whispering beneath the surface. Every sunset, every laugh, every time your eyes well up with gratitude, that's God too. That's the doorway. Some people feel that because they haven't had a mystical vision, they're somehow disqualified from transformation. That is not true. Your brain, your spirit, your life. They are sacred precisely as they are. The small doorways are just as holy. They are the places where the sacred hides in plain sight, where Deus waits not in the extraordinary, but in the intimately familiar. And as you begin to notice them, as you treat your everyday life as a series of invitations to presence, the small doors start to widen. What used to be a fleeting moment of peace becomes a state you can return to. What used to be a whisper becomes a dialogue. And before long you realize the divine was never far away. It was always just on the other side of awareness, waiting for you to slow down, soften, and say yes. So if you've ever cried while listening to a song, if you've ever felt held in a moment of prayer, if you've ever sat in nature and felt like time stopped, you've already touched it, and it's touching you back. You don't need to chase the miraculous. You only need to open the door, even if just a crack, even if only for a breath. The chemistry of transcendence. Every sacred experience is also a chemical one. That doesn't diminish its power. It reveals its intricacy. When you sit in silence and pray, when you close your eyes and feel the presence of Deus washing over you, your body is not passive. Your brain lights up. Your cells respond. Hormones shift. And your nervous system, once ruled by fear and urgency, begins to exhale. We tend to think of prayer and meditation as abstract practices, spiritual disciplines that affect only the soul. But neuroscience shows us they also change the physical body. They reach deep into the mechanisms that regulate emotion, perception, memory, and healing. They are more than practices. They are biological interventions, precise, powerful, and profound. Let's begin with serotonin. This neurotransmitter is associated with well-being, emotional stability, and a sense of connection to life. During meditation and contemplative prayer, serotonin levels rise. The result? A quieting of the overactive mind, a gentleness in the nervous system, a softening of reactivity. People report feeling more patient, more loving, more open, and this isn't just subjective, it's measurable. It's the biology of presence. Now think about dopamine. Dopamine is the molecule of reward, learning, and motivation. When you feel awe, when you experience something sacred, when you connect with Deus in a moment that feels timeless, dopamine surges. This surge doesn't just feel good. It reshapes your brain. It teaches your system that peace is possible. That joy is safe. That love is worth returning to. Then there's oxytocin, the bonding hormone. Often associated with touch and love, oxytocin also rises during spiritual practice. When you pray, when you meditate with others, when you enter that sacred state of connection, oxytocin increases, creating a sense of unity, trust, and emotional safety. It tells your body, you are not alone. And let's not forget GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, the brain's natural tranquilizer. When GABA levels rise, anxiety falls, sleep improves, focus returns. You become more resilient to stress. Practices like focused breathwork, deep meditation, and devotional prayer activate GABA pathways. They aren't just calming you down, they're rewiring your inner world for coherence. All of this points to a single truth. The practices that help us connect with God are also the practices that help our brains repair, rewire, and thrive. And this is no accident. It's design. We were built to commune, to enter altered states of love, silence, and reverence. The pathways are already there, embedded in the architecture of your being. You were born with the machinery of transcendence. Andrew Newberg and other pioneers in neurotheology have shown time and again that spiritual states correspond to shifts in neurochemistry. But what's more important is this: these shifts are not reserved for monks or mystics. They're available to you, right now, in this breath. The science is clear. Meditation and prayer are not just spiritual. They are medicinal. They reduce cortisol, the stress hormone that wreaks havoc on your health. They increase heart rate variability, a marker of emotional resilience. They slow the default mode network, that relentless internal chatter that keeps you trapped in the past and future. In short, they bring you home, to your body, your breath, your soul, your God. And this is why the quiet matters. This is why the pause matters. Because when you step into stillness, when you turn your attention inward, when you open your heart to Deus, you begin to heal. Not metaphorically, literally. Your brain shifts, your body follows, your life opens. This isn't magic. It's mystery revealed through science. It's what happens when the sacred and the cellular touch, and once you experience it, even once, something in you remembers the way back. Unity, dissolving the boundaries of the self. There is a moment during deep prayer or meditation when something extraordinary happens. The sense of you begins to dissolve, not in a frightening way, but in a liberating one, as if the walls between you and everything else slowly fall away. You no longer feel separate from the world, from others, from God. You feel part of it, You feel it within you, around you, as you. This is the essence of unity, and your brain has a mechanism for it. In neuroimaging studies, one of the most consistent findings during deep spiritual states is decreased activity in the parietal lobes, particularly in the posterior superior parietal region. This area is responsible for creating a boundary between self and other, me and not me. When it quiets down, the illusion of separation fades, and what remains is an overwhelming feeling of oneness. Neuroscience calls it depersonalization or boundary dissolution. The mystics called it divine union. And both are pointing to the same phenomenon. When Jewish Kabbalists entered deep kavana, or focused prayer, they described the self melting into the infinite. When Christian mystics like Teresa of Avila reached the seventh mansion of prayer, she reported a complete union with God, a loss of self-consciousness, a radiant stillness. In Hindu traditions, this is called samadhi, the merging of Atman with Brahman, self with the Absolute. In Buddhism, it's the state beyond duality. Different paths, same destination. Neuroscience is just now catching up to what these traditions have known for millennia. Andrew Newberg calls this the unitive experience, and it is one of the most universally reported phenomena across all spiritual practices. Whether through chanting, breathwork, repetitive prayer, fasting, or stillness, the human brain seems wired to access this state. And when it does, something changes. Not just in that moment, but in the way you live your life. People who have tasted unity often describe the world differently afterward. There's less judgment, more compassion, less fear, more trust. The boundaries that kept others at a distance begin to soften. You start to see yourself in the faces of strangers. You begin to recognize God, Deus, in ordinary things. A tree, a laugh, a breeze, a moment of silence. And even if you've never had a full mystical union, you've likely brushed up against it, in moments when time disappeared. When music lifted you, when nature overwhelmed you, when a simple act of kindness opened your heart. These too are tastes of unity, and each one leaves an imprint. From a biological perspective, these experiences create new neural pathways. They change your default perception. They reduce activity in the default mode network, the part of your brain that loops stories about the self, about the past, about your limitations. In place of those loops, unity creates a sense of timeless presence. Instead of thinking about God, you begin to feel Him. Instead of chasing healing, you become the space where healing happens. This is why the practice of stillness matters. It's not about being calm for the sake of calm. It's about opening the door to something vaster, something ancient and eternal, yet so deeply personal. And it begins with surrendering the idea of a separate self. It begins with allowing the mind to quiet, the body to soften, the ego to rest. The illusion of separateness is perhaps the deepest wound of modern life. But every time you pray, every time you meditate, every time you step into stillness, you invite that illusion to dissolve. You invite the truth of your connection to emerge, not as a belief, as a direct experience. And once that experience touches you, you never forget. You may lose the feeling, but the memory lives in your body, calling you back over and over again. So the next time you feel alone, remember this. Your brain knows how to return. Your soul remembers the way, and God has never left. Intensity. When love becomes unforgettable. There are moments in life that mark us forever, not because of what we saw or heard, but because of what we felt. Deep, indescribable, almost unbearable love. The kind of love that doesn't just warm the heart, it explodes inside the chest. It moves through every cell. It leaves you trembling, not from fear, but from recognition. And when people speak about encountering God, Deus, in meditation, prayer, or near-death experiences, this is often what they describe. Not doctrine, not words, but love. So real, so overwhelming, that nothing else in life compares. In neuroscience, these emotional surges can be traced to the limbic system, the emotional center of the brain. More specifically, the amygdala and the hippocampus. These structures light up when we experience intense emotion, and during deep spiritual states, these areas don't just activate, they flood. Imaging studies have shown that when someone feels spiritual ecstasy or divine love, the amygdala goes into a heightened state. But unlike fear-based activation, this is accompanied by feelings of warmth, trust, and transcendence. This intensity is often described by mystics and survivors alike. Saint Francis of Assisi, lost in prayer, wept uncontrollably from a love he said no earthly heart could bear. Sufi poet Rumi wrote, "The minute I heard my first love story, I started looking for you, not knowing how blind that was. Lovers don't finally meet somewhere. They're in each other all along." His poetry was not metaphorical fantasy. It was born of an actual, embodied spiritual experience, one that neuroscience now confirms leaves a lasting imprint on the brain. When people report near-death experiences, they often speak of entering a realm of light and being enveloped by a love that knows everything about them and still loves them fully, not despite their flaws, but because of their truth. That level of emotional intensity doesn't fade like a dream. It gets stored in the hippocampus. It becomes encoded as more real than real. That's why these experiences are never forgotten. Decades later, people remember the feeling of that love more vividly than major life events, and for many this love becomes a turning point. It's the catalyst for forgiveness, for healing trauma, for releasing shame. Because when you are seen fully and still loved, something inside you reorganizes. The nervous system resets. The trauma loop begins to break. The story of "I'm not enough" starts to dissolve. Not because you told yourself a new story, but because you felt something that made the old one impossible to keep believing. Even outside peak experiences, the limbic system is activated in simple practices of devotion. When you close your eyes and whisper a sincere prayer, when you breathe deeply and repeat a sacred word, when you light a candle with intention, these small acts stir the emotional brain. They awaken memory. They create new meaning. And over time, the neural patterns of divine love begin to overwrite those of fear and scarcity. Love, when experienced at this level, becomes a source of power. It doesn't make you passive. It gives you courage to face the day, to forgive the past, to show up differently in your relationships. And even if you've never had a dramatic spiritual moment, you've likely felt echoes of this intensity in the eyes of someone you love, in the arms of a child, in the music that moved you to tears. That's the invitation of this chapter. Not to chase peak experiences, but to recognize the doorways you already have. Your capacity to feel is your gateway. Your tears are sacred. Your longing is a prayer. And every time you enter that emotional space, with sincerity, with openness, you are moving closer to the divine memory written into your body. You are remembering the original language of your soul, and that language is love. Clarity, the spiritual aha moment. There are moments when something just clicks, not because you studied harder, not because someone explained it better, but because something opened inside you, a space of stillness, a flash of understanding. In that moment, all the scattered pieces of your life seem to realign. The confusion clears, the noise softens. You see with different eyes. And often, that moment of clarity feels like a message from something far beyond you, from God, from Deus, from the universe itself. Neurologically, this experience is connected to the thalamus, the brain's relay station. It acts like a filter, determining what information gets through to your conscious awareness. And during deep meditative or prayerful states, something curious happens. The thalamus begins to synchronize with the default mode network and the prefrontal cortex, creating a coherent wave of information. This neurological coherence produces what many describe as downloads, sudden insights that feel absolute, like receiving an answer without needing to ask a question. In spiritual traditions, this moment of inner clarity is called by many names. In Christianity, it's revelation. In Buddhism, kensho, a sudden awakening. In mystical Judaism, devikut, a clinging to God through insight. But the structure of the experience is strikingly similar across cultures. It's not rational deduction, it's knowing. It feels like truth with a capital T. And it carries with it a quiet certainty that remains, even after the moment fades. For many people, these experiences come not in temples or mountaintops, but in ordinary moments. Washing the dishes, walking alone, sitting in silence after a long cry. That's because the brain doesn't require a sacred setting to reach sacred clarity. It only needs openness, the willingness to sit in the unknown without forcing answers. When you allow silence to speak, the thalamus becomes attuned. Your perception widens, and something in you begins to receive what has always been trying to reach you. Sometimes the clarity doesn't come in words, but in an image, a sensation, a sudden inner shift. You were about to make a decision, and something in you said, wait. You were spiraling in fear, and suddenly felt a calm you couldn't explain. You were doubting your worth, and then remembered something someone said to you years ago, and it hit differently. That's the quiet intelligence of the spiritual brain. It doesn't shout, it whispers. But when you're tuned in, those whispers rearrange everything. Many report these moments after a period of darkness, after grief, after hitting bottom. That's not accidental. Neuroscience shows that intense emotion, combined with inner stillness, primes the brain for insight. In other words, your suffering breaks you open. And if you stay present, it also makes you ready. That's when the aha can arise. Not as a fix, but as a shift in seeing. You don't become someone else. You become more yourself. You see what you were too afraid, too busy, or too distracted to see before. And often the message is simple. You are already enough. You are not alone. You are loved. And there is more to your story than this moment of pain. This is why spiritual clarity is not just inspirational. It's transformational. It gives you a new vantage point. It rewrites your map. And once you've seen the world through those eyes, you can never fully unsee it. The thalamus doesn't just deliver information. It reorganizes what matters. And after a true moment of insight, what matters changes. So if you're in a season of confusion, don't rush to escape it. Still the mind. Soften the heart. The clarity you seek is already forming, like light behind clouds. Stay with the breath. Stay with the silence. Deus is not hiding. The signal is being tuned. And when the moment comes, you'll feel it, like truth slipping gently into your bloodstream. Surrender. When the ego lets go. There comes a point in every spiritual journey when striving no longer works. You've read the books, you've said the prayers, you've chased the light. But the harder you try to find God, the farther he seems to slip. And then something breaks, not in despair, but in quiet release. You stop pushing, you stop controlling, you stop demanding answers. And in that stillness, in that empty space you feared, you feel it. A presence, a peace, a warmth that wasn't there before. This is surrender, and it's not a loss, it's the beginning of union. Neuroscience shows that during deep states of surrender, whether through prayer, meditation, or emotional catharsis, the activity in the prefrontal cortex dramatically decreases. That's the part of your brain responsible for executive control, decision-making, and ego. When it quiets down, the self that has been managing, defending, analyzing, and narrating your life begins to dissolve, and something deeper emerges, something older, something sacred. Surrender is not weakness, it's the release of false power. It's the recognition that your attempts to control everything are exhausting you, not saving you. And it's in this neurological letting go that you make room for something else to lead. Call it God, call it Deus, call it life, intelligence, grace. What matters is that you finally let yourself be held by it. Across spiritual traditions, surrender is the turning point. In Christianity, Jesus says in Gethsemane, "Not my will, but yours be done." In Sufism, the mystic surrenders to divine intoxication. In Hinduism, Bhakti Yoga is the path of devotional surrender. In Taoism, the sage flows with the Tao, not against it. Each tradition points to the same paradox. Only by letting go do you truly receive. In modern terms, surrender is the shift from hypervigilance to trust, from clenched fists to open hands, and your brain responds accordingly. The amygdala, your fear center, relaxes. Cortisol levels drop. The body enters parasympathetic mode: rest, digest, and heal. The nervous system, which has been preparing for war, suddenly softens. You are no longer fighting your life. You are living it. But surrender is not a one-time act. It's a practice. It's the willingness to let go again and again of the need to know, the need to prove, the need to fix. And every time you do, something in your brain rewires. You build trust pathways. You learn that not knowing is survivable, that silence is not abandonment, that Deus speaks most clearly when you stop talking over him. This is why so many people experience God most deeply in moments of total collapse. When the plans fail, when the relationship ends, when the health report comes back worse than expected. In these moments, the ego has nothing left to stand on. And into that void, something sacred steps in. Neuroscience doesn't just confirm the brain changes in these moments. It shows how healing begins there. When control dies, possibility is born. Surrender also breaks the illusion of separation. Because when you let go of the need to manage everything, you begin to feel supported. You realize you're not alone. You've never been alone. You were just holding too tightly to see the hands that were trying to catch you. So the next time you find yourself struggling to control outcomes, consider this. Maybe the miracle isn't on the other side of effort. Maybe it's on the other side of release. Maybe what you're looking for can only enter once you stop guarding the door. Let your mind soften. Let your heart unclench. Surrender not because you've failed, but because you're finally ready to be guided. Deus is not asking for your perfection, he is asking for your openness. And when you offer that, fully and freely, what you receive in return is never less than divine. Transformation. When the experience reshapes life. It's not the intensity of the experience that changes your life, it's how deeply it rearranges the story you tell about yourself. Spiritual connection, whether through prayer, silence, or surrender, is not just a moment of bliss. It's a neurological, emotional, and existential pivot. A shift so deep that afterward, nothing feels quite the same. You don't just remember the experience. You become the person who was transformed by it. Neuroscience has shown that profound spiritual experiences don't simply fade like dreams. They leave measurable traces. Brain scans reveal long-term shifts in neural networks, especially in regions tied to emotion regulation, fear response, and meaning-making. For example, individuals who have undergone near-death experiences, deep meditative states, or spontaneous awakenings often display reduced activity in the default mode network, the part of the brain associated with self-referential thought, overthinking, and rumination. That means less mental noise, less looping anxiety, more space for presence. But the transformation isn't just inside your skull. It bleeds into how you move through the world. People report newfound compassion, a softer way of speaking, a slower way of living. Relationships shift, priorities reorder. The need to impress, to compete, to constantly prove something begins to evaporate. You're not better than before. You're just more real. And the root of this change is not logic. It's not discipline. It's direct contact with something greater, with God, with Deus, with the sacred intelligence that breathes through every cell. When you've touched that depth even briefly, it rewrites what you thought was possible. It shows you that healing isn't about fixing the surface, it's about remembering your original wholeness, the part of you that was never broken to begin with. One of the most striking scientific findings comes from long-term meditators and spiritual practitioners. Their fear of death decreases significantly, not because they become reckless or detached, but because something in them trusts what comes next. After surrendering into the vastness of Deus, through stillness, prayer, or a single breath, death no longer feels like an ending. It feels like a return. This is why survivors of trauma, addiction, or loss often describe spiritual awakening not as a luxury but as a necessity. When everything you've built collapses and all the old coping strategies fail, there's a rawness left behind, a holy emptiness, and into that space, something unshakable begins to rise, not through force, Through grace, scientists call it post-traumatic growth, mystics call it rebirth. Whatever the language, the pattern is the same. Collapse becomes doorway, grief becomes teacher, suffering becomes compost for the soul, and the brain, far from resisting this change, adapts. Neuroplasticity allows for the reshaping of old trauma patterns, the rewiring of shame, the building of new emotional maps. Through repetition of prayer, of meditation, of surrender, these neural pathways deepen. Healing becomes not just possible, it becomes inevitable. And what's even more remarkable is that you don't need to seek a massive spiritual breakthrough for this to begin. Even gentle, repeated contact with God, moments of quiet prayer, moments of being deeply present with nature, moments of stillness in the middle of chaos, slowly reshape you, bit by bit, thought by thought, breath by breath, until one day you look back and realize you're not who you used to be. That is the miracle. Not floating off into the cosmos, not hearing voices or seeing visions, but waking up one day and noticing your heart is softer, your mind is quieter, your reactions slower, your presence deeper. You are living from a place you once only visited, and the quiet places in your brain, those sacred rooms, are now open, lived in, lit from within. You didn't chase transformation, you became it. The bridge between science and mysticism. The moment we believe science and spirituality are enemies, we miss the most powerful truth of all. They are speaking about the same reality, just in different languages. The laboratory and the monastery have never been so close. One maps the mechanism, the other lives the mystery. And somewhere in the quiet places of your brain, they meet. For centuries, mystics have described transcendent states that seemed beyond reason, merging with God, dissolving into the universe, hearing the divine in silence. In the past, these claims were dismissed as hallucination, religious metaphor, or poetic madness. But neurotheology, the science of spiritual experience, is revealing something stunning. These states are real, repeatable, and neurologically consistent. Not imaginary, not illusion, but measurable events in the brain. And more importantly, transformational in the life. When Andrew Newberg scans the brain of someone in deep prayer or meditation, what lights up is not imagination, but embodiment. The emotional centers ignite. The ego centers dim. Integration happens, and the person often reports a direct encounter with God, with Deus, with Source. This is not proof that God exists. It's a bridge, a mirror, a map showing that the spiritual path is not delusion. It's deeply human. And that's the miracle of this modern age. We no longer have to choose between believing or understanding. We can feel the mystery and trace its shape. We can worship and wonder, pray and scan, surrender and study, because both the sacred and the scientific are pulling us in the same direction, toward wholeness, coherence, transcendence. God is not confined to churches or temples. Deus is not a concept trapped in books. The divine reveals itself in synapses and sunsets, in scripture and serotonin, in parables and prefrontal cortexes. When a Buddhist monk enters a state of non-duality, or a Christian mystic dissolves into ecstatic union, or a secular meditator touches vast stillness, they are each entering the same field, using different doors. The brain reflects it, the soul confirms it. The language may vary, but the truth resonates the same, and this is why the spiritual seeker of today is different. They are not satisfied with dogma. They want depth. They want embodiment. They want to know what's happening inside them when they feel connected to God. They want to trust their own experience and also understand it. They are not content with blind faith, but they are also not limited to sterile facts. They are weaving something new, a faith that feels and a science that breathes. So when someone asks, is there scientific evidence that prayer works? The answer is not just yes. The answer is, prayer rewires the brain. It calms the amygdala, regulating fear. It strengthens the prefrontal cortex, improving focus and resilience. It increases oxytocin, deepening compassion and bonding. It is one of the most neurologically beneficial practices known to humans, not because it's magic, but because it touches something ancient and essential, because it connects us to each other, to the world, and to the God who breathes through it all. That is the bridge, not built in argument, but in awe, in humility, in curiosity. In the courage to say, I don't need to choose between what I feel and what I know. I can walk with one foot in mystery and one in method. I can close my eyes and touch God, then open them and see how my brain lit up like a cathedral. Maybe that's what the mystics were trying to tell us all along, that God is not out there, Deus is within. And now, for the first time in history, the MRI agrees. The quiet places in your brain are not blank spaces, they are sacred doors. And every moment you slow down, every breath you offer, every word you whisper to God, you are stepping closer to that threshold where the divine and the human meet. We began this journey asking what happens in the brain when you connect with God. We explored the universal longing that drives mystics, scientists, seekers, and survivors to the same horizon, that point where the known dissolves and something vast, luminous, and healing takes over. And now we arrive not at a conclusion, but at a beginning. Throughout these 65 minutes, we uncovered 5 timeless elements that appear again and again in spiritual experience, no matter the language or tradition. Unity, intensity, clarity, surrender, transformation. These are not poetic accidents. They are neurological signatures, the architecture of transcendence woven into the very design of your brain. When you enter deep prayer or meditation, when you lose yourself in awe or love or gratitude, these circuits ignite, not as fantasy, but as your birthright. So maybe your mind wasn't meant to stay stuck in chaos. Maybe your soul wasn't meant to live in exile. Maybe those quiet places were built for something, to receive light, to transmit peace, to dissolve walls, to echo back the voice of Deus when all other noise fades away. You don't need to be a saint or a monk to experience this. You just need to begin, to pause, to pray, to breathe as if God were listening, because He is. Not from far away, but from within the deepest center of you where science and silence converge. The truth is, you are not separate from God. You are not broken beyond healing, and no matter how disconnected you feel, your brain still remembers how to return. The path is ancient, yet always new, and it begins every time you turn inward with sincerity. So take this with you. Let it echo beyond the end of this video. You are not chasing the divine, you said you are made of it. Your biology is not your limit, it's your bridge. And prayer is not wishful thinking. It's the recalibration of your entire being into coherence, into presence, into wholeness. May every meditation become a meeting. May every breath remind you that Deus is near. May every silent moment become a cathedral. Because the quiet places in your brain were never empty. They were waiting for you to come home. If this journey resonated with you, if it stirred something ancient in your memory or ignited a longing for something more, I invite you to share your own experience below. Tell us how you pray. Tell us when you felt closest to God. Or tell us where you're still searching, because your story matters. And maybe, just maybe, your voice will help someone else find their way home too. This is not the end. It's the beginning of something sacred.